Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Christoph Young. I'm a character designer and illustrator, and today I'm working on a character design. This character is called the Challenger. I posted a turnaround of her a couple weeks ago, and now I'm creating a sort of pose design sheet. Hopefully I can get this all colored up as well. And yeah, so we're just starting with some rough sketches, some gesture drawing. I'll be talking through this process and discussing a little bit about the art style exploration that I've been doing, as well as just some of the things happening on the screen. So whatever stage I'll be in at the moment, if I have any notes, I'll point them out. And to begin with, so I think I've been focusing a lot more on drawing from imagination these days. So all these pose drawings and gesture drawings are all done from imagination with no reference. And this is not only to challenge myself to really dig out like my knowledge of anatomy and gesture, but also just to focus on the shape design and the graphic design of the drawing itself, instead of matching a reference. So I find that when I'm studying a lot from reference, whether it be doing figure drawing or character designs where I have a lot of references gathered for whatever I'm working on, I find I sometimes get a little bit bogged down by the information the reference is giving me, instead of taking my own artistic license on how to draw certain things. So this is sort of distilling down my sort of my habits and stuff. So you can see what I think of different shapes, and what I think of anatomy, and what I think of gesture drawing comes through exactly in my lines. So it's not really filtered out by me trying to interpret some reference. So the goal for this sheet is just to create a lot of different dynamic poses for this character. I imagine her being a sort of fighter in a Colosseum type like death match, and she wields these two semicircular blades. So I'm trying to bring those shapes out with the gesture and create these like graphic poses. So I'm also kind of playing a lot with the size of the poses, and well, in this case, the symmetry as well. So this pose is going to be a lot more symmetrical, straight on, and then the other two poses are going to be a bit smaller and more diagonal. So it should just, I'm trying to find a balance between size and shapes to sort of lead your eye through this composition of lots of different poses. So this page is going to get really busy eventually in my line drawings, just because I have 3 characters to deal with, and even though this character design is pretty quote-unquote simple for my typical characters, I'm dealing with like a line and flats sort of art style, so the lines do get pretty crazy. But right now, after once I figured out the main layout of the page, so I'm gonna have these 3 poses. This big one that I'm working on right now is going to be a sort of front-facing close-up shot, and then the 2 other ones are going to be a full-body sort of action pose. So now that I have those laid out on the page, I can start detailing out a little bit, like sketching out the actual features, so that when I go and do line art on top, I don't have to think too much about the design, and I can think just about the line quality and where I'm placing lines on the page. So I'm resolving a lot of the sort of secondary and tertiary details here once I have those initial layouts in. So my main concern here is going to be to avoid tangents. So with a lot of like flowing lines and overlaps and stuff, I think it's cool for the composition to have a lot of overlapping, but that can be a huge headache for tangents if I'm not careful. So tangents are basically when two unrelated things just happen to be tangent to one another. So um, like they abut one another, and it kind of like messes up where your eye is supposed to flow to, because it creates this unwanted correlation between two objects. So I'm just being careful to create as few of those as possible. They might happen, but you can't. I'm also human, so so here I'm just playing with the sort of shape language, kind of trying to exaggerate the shapes of the anatomy, and just create like I'm always thinking, just try to create something that's more graphic and more appealing. So from doing years of gesture drawing and figure drawing, I have developed a bit of a shorthand for anatomy. That's kind of specific to my style. Some other artists might tackle those shapes a bit differently, but I'm basically trying to bring those shapes out, and yeah, really convey that through the lines. So you can see I'm doing a lot of like erasing and redrawing and erasing and redrawing, and that's just to find the sort of true line. When I'm drawing from imagination, I tend to do this a lot more than if I was doing some sort of like constructive figure drawing, just because I don't have a reference in front of me. So the only reference I have is what I've previously drawn. So like my underlying sketch. And I found that this is not only a really meditative process, but it's just a really rewarding process, because I get to sort of like correct my drawing as I go along. And yeah, it feels like it's coming straight from my brain or straight from my heart. So so yeah, just figuring out the stuff, resizing things, moving things around. For this symmetrical one, I'm kind of copying, pasting, and warping stuff over to the other side, just to save some time. And you can see that the leg in front is like really foreshortened, and that's just to create a lot of like big graphic shapes on the page, and to keep things interesting. So I'm working on a square page. This is going to be this is intended to go into an art book eventually that I want to be in a square format. So I've been doing a lot of my pieces lately on this sort of square format page, always thinking of like, what is the purpose of this artwork. So yeah, so that's just a bit about the formatting. And now I am drawing in the weapons. So the weapons have this like semicircular shape, which means that they're all sort of ellipses, and I kind of knock my head against the wall for designing that, as well as the shoulder pads. Like all the shoulder pads are semicircular, which means a lot of like elliptical arcs, and drawing those sort of shapes over and over is really quite challenging, especially when you need to do them from multiple angles and different sizes, and have it all flow together with one drawing. So bit of a challenge, but I'm having lots of fun with this character, and I find these pose pages or design pages with multiple drawings of the character just add so much storytelling and personality to the character. So I've been having a lot of fun with those lately too, just to kind of like do a bit of more storytelling and more world building with each character that I design. I've also been working a little bit more on developing a style that I could turn into like a comic or graphic novel, potentially. So something that is just more efficient than a fully painted art style. Although there are ways of creating like a comic or graphic novel in a fully illustrated style. Um, there's reasons for doing a more like there's a lot of like wisdom that you can derive from, comic book and graphic novel art styles that have been done in the past. Most of them feature, clean lines and flats, with just minimal rendering uh, to help for print and all that stuff. So I've been exploring a bit of that, and that's why I'm kind of going into a more line art and flats color. I have done a lot of this art style for previous clients when I worked in video games. So this is kind of, bringing back some of those memories as I'm working on this, especially on some projects where I have done these sort of post sheets for characters. So yeah, so now I'm just going over everything and drawing in like the secondary details, trying to keep my lines or my shapes really graphic and dynamic. I try to not like lose the gesture or lose the fluidity of the poses as I'm doing the line art, and just to try to like keep what I had that was working in the sketch. So even though some of the shapes might not be perfect, like anatomically accurate, or just super realistic, that's totally fine because it's a stylized piece, and part of the style is like exaggerating the pose and exaggerating the anatomy and all that stuff. So now I'm just drawing in some of the facial features. Can be kind of tricky to create like an appealing face at this size because you have like very little real estate to work on. And now sketching my lines, over or sketching through the object right now just to kind of figure out what's in the back. So a quick note on just like what to draw at which stage. So in my sketch, I tend to draw through the object. So I try to create a lot of shapes that are, I draw the full three-dimensional shape. So if there's like, let's say that the leg of this character that I'm working on is overlapping the torso, I'll actually draw the shape of like the pelvis and the shape of the rib cage and the shape of like all the costume elements that go on top and sort of layer everything in the sketch. But when I go in to do line art, obviously that's like the superficial treatment of the final drawing, so I only draw what's on top. And a good way of doing that is just to start with what's in front and then move your way towards the back. But sometimes for really important things or important like mostly anatomical landmarks and anatomical structure, sometimes I'll draw just the whole shape through. So for example, on the smaller one that I was working on, I drew like the shape of the cranium even though it's going to be covered by the weapon, and that's just in case there's like a hole in the weapon. I want to be able to have that shape seen underneath. So so now I'm working on the bigger character, just making sure that all my lines look nice and clean. I'm also focusing on line weight, making sure that the overlaps, so areas where two things are intersecting, like you can see between the shoulder pads and arms, there's like I use small sort of triangular darker marks right at the corners, so that sort of shows the overlap. It's almost like ambient occlusion for the line drawing. And then the interior lines I try to keep a little bit lighter so that they aren't distracting from the overall form. She's got this sort of honeycomb or what are those like little wands to to dip out honey? Or her hair sort of looks like a beehive, but it's supposed to be like a wrapped dreadlock. And here, so I just popped on screen. I was actually working on this during a Patreon live stream. So if you're interested in this sort of content or the real-time versions of this, you can hop over to my Patreon where I stream every Sunday. And I talk about, the design process and what I'm working on every week. And, just chat and have fun with my patrons while I'm working on stuff. So yeah, the link to my Patreon is down in the description if that is something you might be interested in. Now, moving on to the third character. So before resolving all the intersections, I'm sort of figuring out the main aspects of all three characters. So like where the characters overlap, I'll resolve that last, just so that I don't need to draw and erase my final line art. And you can see I'm just working on 2 layers right now. So I have my sketch layer and my line art layer. My line art layer is going to contain everything. I could potentially shoot myself in the foot by making a mistake and then having to cut everything out and separate it onto other layers and all that stuff. But I'm pretty confident in my layout, so far so good. So you can see here that this is a situation where I would draw through, like for the handle of the weapon, I want to make sure that handle is parallel all the way through the hand, even though the hand is going to overlap it. It's not on screen anymore, but you can rewind to see that like 2-second splurge. So yeah, now drawing some overlaps, talking a little bit about the process. So that's sort of a post that I worked on for my patrons. And now back to just adjusting some line weight and adding more lines. So this is just lots of lines, just working through every element. If you're getting bored of my voiceover, feel free to listen to music. But this is sort of all the same, just going through every element. Can also be good if you're new to working in this style. You need to be pretty diligent about what you're drawing, and making sure that you're drawing elements properly, either on both sides of the character. For example, she has 2 shoulder pads, one on each arm. So you need to draw them the same on both sides. And sometimes we sort of like take for granted or we underestimate how difficult or how demanding that can be. But you need to sort of make a mental checklist or a real checklist. I would actually highly recommend creating a real checklist of the things that you need to draw on both sides if you're if you kind of struggle with that. So when I would do a lot of character design for video game characters at the beginning of my career, I would actually create sort of red line notes to mark what I was missing or what I needed to draw or what I had left to draw, because it can be a bit of like a scramble at the end when you think that you're getting close, and then you realize that, for example, on this character, I realized that I had the hair to draw. like the long dreads to draw on every character. And then I realized that, you know, she was missing a shoulder pad on one side, or she was missing some sort of like, you know, a little tail at the end of the weapons, like the little pom things. So creating those mental checklists, or you can even create like another layer and just write yourself notes as you're working on stuff, because it's easy to kind of get into the flow of things and then forget what you actually need to draw. So sometimes I leave stuff out of my sketch, and I just rely on my memory to make sure that I draw it in the line art phase, but I always end up missing something. It can be like, you know, small details like jewelry, or small like design details on weapons, or it can be, sometimes it can be large elements, like I forget to draw an arm, or I forget to draw a leg, just because it's slightly obscured, or it's in a bit of an awkward spot, and that'll just prevent you from you know, drawing stuff that starts in one place and actually never ends, or or just, you know, missing elements. I see this a lot with just artists who do turnarounds of characters, and they draw one thing in the front view and a completely different thing, or a bunch of stuff is missing in the back view, like stuff like a strap, for example. They'll draw a strap crossing the body in the front, and then they won't draw it crossing the body in the back. It'll be either like gone or just missing, or wrapping up, you know, at the wrong angle in the back. And the same thing for, like, you know, sometimes they'll draw a tail coat, and you see like the tail of the coat from the back view, but you don't see it in the front view, like you don't see it behind the legs. So so that can be a bit of doing like mental gymnastics while you're working on your character design. But it's really important, just for consistency, to think of your character design as a complete three-dimensional object, and not just as one, you know, 2D graphic shape on the page. And here now I'm just like you know, finishing up this character on the weapon. Still talking, I think I'm giving little mini tutorials to my patrons, talking a little bit brush settings, and I've been playing a little bit with my brush settings, just to create more of an inking brush, so something that goes to full opacity a bit faster than my normal sort of airbrush art style. But, you know, it's just a small difference. You can see my brush settings here. It mostly has to do with just having the transfer on, and then adjusting the depth in the texture setting. So I have a bit of grit on my brush, and it's just about adjusting like the depth and the minimum depth of the brush, so that it sort of acts like you want it to act. So here I'm resolving those junctions. So you can see that where the characters overlap, I can now finish that. And here I'm drawing like the overlapping weapon, because I drew the head underneath. So this is just because the head is important. I wanted to draw it in full so that I don't have like a weirdly shaped head under the weapon. But yeah, now I need to draw this sort of dagger shape on top, and a bit of struggling with the elliptical shape. I was kind of joking a bit about this with my patrons because I could just use an ellipse guide, but I was lazy, and now I'm drawing a very small hand. There you go, size it up a bit. It's kind of funny to look back on these time-lapse videos and do commentary over them, because as I draw stuff, I can see what kind of mistakes I'm gonna do, and that I'm gonna correct them in like 4 seconds. So anyways, just a bit of a tangent, but here I'm drawing the little tails on the weapons, and little secondary details like this, they can add a lot of movement to the piece. So stuff like the sort of fabric that's draping between her legs, or her hair, or this little tail on the weapon, it shows a lot of like the movement, and I'm explaining a bit of this for my patrons, but just how to create a more dynamic pose. And what I'm basically, like, just to resume, I'm trying to find a main gesture line, and then I'm trying to make the other elements kind of spiral around them. So you can see that, like, maybe the main gesture goes from the head all the way to the ground, through, you know, the torso, the pelvis, and through one of the legs. But all the other elements, like the hair and the weapons and the arms and all that stuff, is kind of spiraling in a direction around that main gesture line. And that just allows your eye to kind of like flow through the gesture, flow through the character, and yeah, go from one image to the other. So I'm also using some other compositional elements, like, you know, where the main gesture lines of each character are pointing. So to try to create some sort of correlation between the poses, so they're not just like, you know, randomly generated poses, or like, you know, there's a compositional purpose to each of those poses and to the gesture. And even the placement, like, I'm placing these three characters in a triangle on purpose, and having one element lead to the other, or one character element leading to another character element, sort of pointing, so that your eye keeps traveling from one character to the other. And that just, you know, keeps the viewer interested for more than 3 seconds, hopefully. You're trying to accentuate a bit of the overlaps. And there, so far I have I've almost achieved no tangents. There's a couple small ones, but so far so good. And I'm gonna realize shortly that I'm missing 2 crucial components, and I could see you might have guessed it and might be scratching your head, but basically this big character and the character that's flying through the air, they're both missing their dreads, which is like a huge part of the character, and this is kind of what I'm talking about with creating a checklist of elements that you need to do. So I realized that at the end of my my Patreon stream, and I was getting really hungry for lunch, so I just decided to give it a break and to come back later. So this is another session. And I'm also realizing that I'm missing some other elements, like the shoulder pads on this character, and the dreads, and a couple other little things. So, you know, giving your eyes a break, and then just creating like a checklist will help you just get everything in, get everything done. And I also understand now. So when they talk about simplifying your designs for either a comic book or animation, this is why, is because when you have to draw multiple versions of the characters, um, all those features get multiplied. So, for example, if she had 5 braids, I would only need to draw 15 braids in total because I have 3 characters, so 3 times 5, quick maths. Um, but, if she has a dozen, then I need to draw 36 braids. So that quickly adds up, in terms of time and the cost. So I have, even though this, like I mentioned earlier, this is a fairly simple character design in my books, to have to draw, 6 times the weapons, 30 times the braids, all the armor elements, it adds up a lot. But I think I got everything done finally, and now I'm starting to shade in. So the shading process that I'm using is just going to be like a sort of graphic shape shading. So I'm not going to do a lot of like form rendering, and that's just going to help with the sort of clean lines and flats art style. Although I'm trying to keep a bit of a soft edge on my shapes so that it doesn't feel too, I guess, yeah, too hard or too harsh. And this will blend in a bit better with the lines and the underlying shapes. So just trying to keep those shadow shapes really graphic, and really simple, and I'm less dependent on like realistic lighting than I am on just the graphic read of things. So if it feels like the overlaps are happening, and you can sort of read the overall forms, then the shadows are doing their jobs. I'm also thinking a bit about the ratio of shadow to light. So I'm trying to keep shadows sort of under 30% of the surface. So I want most of the character to be in light, and a minority of the character to be in shadow, and that'll just help with the read too. Sometimes if you do like half the characters cast in shadow, then it almost feels like there's too much contrast, or your eye doesn't really know what to focus on. So you can see I'm simplifying some of those shapes, especially when there are islands of shadow that are kind of like on their own. I try to merge them into bigger graphic shapes. Like here, I started with some small shapes for the hair and just decided that whole area should be cast in shadow. I am thinking though of my planes. So sometimes you can use shadow to accentuate overlaps. So I'm doing that for the weapon here that's overlapping her head, and that'll sort of bring the weapon forward and add more contrast around her face, so that you concentrate on that. And you can do the same in the opposite way. Like here, I'm casting a shadow in the back part of the fabric. Like at in like her leg area, and that'll sort of push the fabric back. And now I can start flatting. So I pulled up my character design, and just selected my colors, created some swatches so that I can, so that I have the exact same colors. And yeah, now I'm just going through filling, the silhouette to mask out all the characters and just make sure that I have like a clean mask for everything. And I'm just using the sort of base skin tone to mask everything out. And this can also be another a bit of a tedious process to make sure that everything is masked out properly, and that the 3D forms are are consistent all the way through. And I will adjust a couple of those things as I work, because there's 3 overlapping characters, and sometimes the stuff that's in the back it needs to follow through all the way towards the front, and there's a lot of like overlapping and complexity. So the more I resolve in these flats, the more I'll see what's not working, and the more that the character or the 3 characters will read individually. So right now they're kind of all melting together, which is a bit confusing to work on. But the more I separate these elements out, the more we'll be able to differentiate them. Which is also just like a sign of a good character design is, if you can throw a bunch of characters on the page, and you can see how they all are separate from one another, or are all individual. It just means that your character design has like a good first read in terms of like iconography and graphic design. So just working from big to small. My goal here is just not to reselect anything. So I'm working with a non-anti-aliased pencil and lasso, so that I can get those selections just like one and done, and I don't need to like fiddle with edges too much. Here again is kind of like a good demonstration of the importance of a simple character design for these kinds of sheets. I only have 6 colors for this character. In the past, I might have used like 15 or 20, which means like 20 different flats. So this is more than 3 times the amount. And that basically it just triples the time that you spend flatting. So I found that over the years I've simplified my color schemes more and more, and it's helped my character designs, like the read and how memorable they are. But it also just makes my drawing process and even my design process a lot more efficient. I mean, if you just compare trying to figure out 20 colors compared to trying to figure out 6 colors, it's the latter is much easier. And it's the same in graphic design. If you're trying to create a logo for a company or for a brand, and you're dealing with a lot of different colors and gradients and all this stuff, it can be really difficult to create a palette that works and that's memorable. So I'm kind of creating that for the character design. So I try to do basic material separation, and if 2 colors are really close, I'll just make them the same color. So the blades need to stand out, and then the armor and the cloth needs to stand out. So I basically have like skin plus hair, cloth, metal, and then the metal for the blades that needs to contrast a bit more. And this is the only real bit of rendering that I'm doing just on the face, and that's just to give a little bit more care to that area. Doing a little bit of rendering on the focal point can elevate a piece a lot. And so I'm just adding a little bit of sort of like makeup and blush and a little bit of life to the skin, as well as a little bit of rendering around the eyes just to make those pop. And here, just spending more time just making sure that all my flats are right. I kind of do multiple passes and see that I'm forgetting something every time. And yeah, so that's that's about the end of this process. I'm adding a couple little glows and shines, and just some finishing touches. But that's going to be it for this character. So I hope you enjoyed this process. Again, I stream every Sunday on my Patreon. If you're interested in seeing how I work on this stuff live and asking questions, I'm always happy to help and to chat with my patrons. And we also have a Discord community where I'll be restarting some monthly challenges. So check that out if you decide to go over to my Patreon. And I'm also starting a character design masterclass. So I've been working on a sort of fully comprehensive course for the last couple months, and the fall session is now open for registration. So fall session is starting September 15th, and there's still a few spots. So if you're interested in learning the ins and outs of character design, I'll be covering the whole course from A to Z. So we'll be doing drawing fundamentals, we'll be doing anatomy, we'll also be doing character design philosophy and methods or pipeline. So you can also check the link to that in the description. Just head over to christophyoung.com. So thanks for checking it out. We'll see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.